With the end of 2017 fast approaching, the moment has come to briefly pause and review the year that has been so far. The Sydney Rugby Business Network will be doing just that on Tuesday, the 14th of November, during an event which will be a robust discussion about all things in Australian rugby. President of the Rugby Union Players Association and Wallabies Lock, Dean Mumm, is one of the guest speakers lined up, and the Rugby Business Network has the great pleasure of catching up with him ahead of the event. Dean, it's a real honour to have the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you for providing us with some of your time.
No worries. Very excited to be speaking to you in the lead up to the Sydney Rugby Business Network event. It should be a great night.
Most definitely. Well, Dean, for those that have followed your career as a professional rugby player would know that you were in fact born in Auckland. In light of this, why did you end up playing your rugby in Australia and for the Wallabies and not for the All Blacks?
One would argue maybe that's a bit easy to get in the Wallabies and the All Blacks, but the simple fact was that my parents are both from New Zealand, and hence why I was born there. But opportunity for Dad and for his work life brought us over to Sydney, and I came here at 18 months old. So Sydney has always been home for me, and I grew up and from a very young age and did all my schooling here. So Australia is very much home for me, albeit with Kiwi roots, and my grandfather was also an All Black, so it's a little bit of conflict, but nonetheless very pleased with what's gone and transpired.
Well, as I mentioned at the start, this is a good point in 2017 to reflect on the year that has been thus far. I suppose it's also a great opportunity for you to take some time to review your professional career, as in May of this year, you announced that you were retiring from all forms of rugby at the end of the season. Have you had a moment yet to look at what have been some of the standout moments for you?
Yeah, I have, and I was really fortunate, really, as I left rugby. One, in that I could leave on my own terms. So many of my friends and so many people that you experience and you go through rugby with don't get to leave on their own agenda, either through injury or through illness or whatever. So I feel pretty lucky in that sense that you can get away and leave and plan for your transition. I had 2 months off after I finished playing rugby, and it was now allowed me to have time, a holiday, and spend time with looking after my son. So that's a really great period to be able to reflect on what has been, and fortunately get to a point where I'd achieved as much as in rugby as I'd ever perceived I could. And so you can leave with a level of contentment and move on into life after.
That's wonderful to hear. Well, your career with the Wallabies, that spanned over 8 years. You played your 57th and possibly final test for them at the end of 2016 against England at Twickenham. Are you disappointed at all that you have not gotten one last international game this year, or do you still have hope that there will be a call-up for you at the end of year tests in Europe?
No, I'm very content. There won't be a game, and the only sad thing I have is a win against England in Twickenham would have been a lovely way to go out, but that's not to be, and it's all written down now. So that's no worries. I'm very happy. 57 tests. When I left and played in the UK for a number of years, and when I left at that stage in 2012, I had 33 tests to my name. So to come back and get an additional 24 was beyond what I imagined. So I feel very fortunate to have played that many.
Well, speaking of your club career with Waratahs, which was absolutely spectacular, how difficult was it for you to say farewell to your teammates this year, considering that when you left in 2012 to go captain English Premiership side Exeter, you never thought that you would return in 2015?
It wasn't hard. I mean, I think the nature about rugby and whether you play in the lower grades or you're playing club rugby or you're lucky enough to play professionally is that your friends are your friends, and they always will be. All it is that you won't see them as often. You won't be sharing experience with them on the football field. So you don't feel like you're saying goodbye. Since I came back from the UK, you've been really treasured because it's very true that you don't really know what you had until you lose it, and I lost it for a while. And so to come back and really get these opportunities, and they are opportunities. When you first time round, you think maybe it all happens a little quick and you just go on the ride. But the second time round, you really understand it for the opportunity that it is, and to represent, for me, my state and the Waratahs, a team I always wanted to play for. And even better for your country in Australia. So they were really treasured moments for me, and it's nice to be mindful in those moments and understand what you're doing and understand the nature of the opportunity that it is.
Definitely. Well, I'm sure when you announced in May that you were going to hang up your rugby boots at the conclusion of the season, thoughts of what the next step in your life would be probably came into your mind. Would you say you were prepared for your career transition, considering that it's actually still ongoing and that it doesn't just happen overnight?
No, it doesn't. I think I really think that's the key. And I don't think you prepare for a transition once you retire. I think you prepare for many, many years. And, I think I speak for current players, and certainly in my case, was that there's a level of anxiety of leaving rugby because rugby is what you know. It's safe. You understand how it operates. And you really get looked after. You get spoon-fed a little bit. Your diary is not yours. You don't have control of what you do day to day. You get told when you holiday. You get to some wonderful things, and every time you do one of those wonderful things, you got 30 people around you. When you transition, there's an anxiety about leaving that and the unknown that comes with it. So you've got to. I found that I started working on this years and years ago. Not only the study that I was able to complete, but more I was able to do some work experience in the last sort of 18 months of playing, and that took away some of that unknown to do with it. I knew and understood what it was like to sit in an office and whether I could or couldn't do that, and got to know the people that ultimately I'm working with now. So that element and just trying and putting your feet in the water as such is pretty helpful to removing some of the anxieties and probably enjoying the moment that you have in the rugby jumper.
Well, having touched on there the people that you are busy working with now, you just recently have become the account manager at one of the world's leading insurance brokers, Jardine Lloyd Thompson, there in Australia. How did this opportunity come about, and is this the sort of business career you wish to pursue, considering that you have completed both a Masters of Commerce and a Bachelor of Business?
It is. I always saw myself as entering financial services in some sense, and I had a lot of conversations to work out where best I would fit. Because when you leave rugby and you leave sport of any kind, even leaving the armed forces, you're older than the pack, so without necessarily the specialist skill to come with it. And what it took a little while for me was to understand that you've gained a whole range of intangible skills, things that might not fit in a CV so well, but the ability to work with a high-performance team, the ability to lead teams in high-pressure circumstances. And these are some of the elements that you don't otherwise have. So this is a career that I was very fortunate and very happy to get into. And it all came about actually through a link in Exeter, not a link in Sydney. So I met I did a little bit of work experience with a guy in Exeter who had a friend that worked in insurance in London. And after meeting this guy a couple of times, I had some time free in London and met sort of well-positioned executives in the London insurance market. And as a result of that meeting, I got an opportunity in Sydney. So it kind of is pretty tenuous as such, but you never know who's going to have an effect on your career or what that person or what that moment is, and you just got to try and speak to as many people as you can.
It's great to see how those connections of networking play such a massive role no matter where you are in the world. Well, Dean, it really has been a busy and memorable year for you, as in February you were elected as president of the Rugby Union Players Association. How have you settled into this role, and what would you say has been the biggest challenge for you thus far as being the association's president?
Well, it didn't take long. You didn't have much time to settle in. It's been a tumultuous year in Australian rugby, as no doubt those in Australia and from afar would have noticed with all the goings on with the eventual culling of the force as a team here. So it's been a pretty interesting year for the Players Association over here, in the fact that we've been very open in the fight and saying that we believe Australian rugby was better off with 5 teams. Being involved in that has been pretty fascinating. And you go through. I think what's interesting is you go through rugby as a player without giving much thought or having much perspective on some of the goings on behind the scenes, particularly on the commercial side of things. And it's been a very big year for Rupert on that front, fighting that fight and ultimately losing that in court, but life moves on. You've got to rebuild those relationships because at the current stage we're doing a collective bargaining agreement here, negotiating a collective bargaining agreement with the Australian Rugby Union again. So it's there's no time to cry over spilt milk as such. It's time to move on and try and plan for a future for the players in Australia.
Great way to put it. Taking a look now at the Sydney Rugby Business Network event coming up on the 14th of November. This will provide all those looking to attend with the perfect opportunity to tackle the issues and obstacles rugby as a sport is currently facing in Australia. In your opinion, Dean, in what state is rugby at a professional level right now in the country?
Oh, it's been better. I think you're going to be a little bit naive to think otherwise, But not only what's been going off the field, but you can't hide away from the fact that as 5 Super Rugby franchises, we didn't perform at all. And if it wasn't for the nature of the competition, which is a separate issue that they're trying to get fixed, we wouldn't have figured in the final series at all as a nation. So that's concerning, from a high performance side of view. So, but when these things happen and when there is a trough as such, there's an opportunity to fix it as well. And what it's given Australia is an opportunity to come together and really plan out a future. So there's some really interesting conversations going on about getting a far more collaborative approach rather than Super Rugby teams being silos, being much more collaborative in their methods for high performance and going after that and making sure that we're creating winning Wallabies is a pinnacle going forward. And when you structure those high performance measures to make sure that the flagship team is going well, hopefully that flows down into the other pathways because winning doesn't happen overnight. And I think you see that if you really want that sustainable element of winning, like they have in New Zealand, I think we can all agree that they're by far the best on that. Then it needs to be a holistic approach to the game as a whole and making sure all those pathways are in good shape.
And Dean, you haven't been directly involved with the Wallabies this year at all, but you've obviously been able to see from the outside looking in. Not the best of results with back-to-back losses to the All Blacks, a couple of draws with the Springboks and a loss to Scotland at the beginning of the year. There are still obviously the tests coming up in November, but what is your assessment of the Wallabies this year?
Yeah, I think those draws, both from a South African and an Australian point of view, measure out your season a little bit, don't they? I mean, if you were able to pick up both wins there and you've come away in the Rugby Championship with 4 wins out of 6, then that's a pretty good result, But both the draws on that front, really, they kind of hold back your momentum from a perception point of view. But if you look at how the Wallabies are playing, and I think there was clearly some defensive issues earlier in the year that I think that have stemmed a little bit now, but I think they're playing a pretty good brand of footy. And I think the problem with maybe the Wallabies at the moment is it's a little bit of too much of a fluctuation in their performance, but it's definitely moving the right way, and I'm very confident we've got the right people, players and coaching staff to improve it.
Definitely. Well, having spoken about the problems that have been encountered for the national team and the club teams this year, players leaving to further their careers in Europe and never coming back is also quite a concern. You are one of the very few 30-something-year-old Australian players to not bow out in Europe, but instead come back home and resume a professional career for club and country. Is there a way to try and convince other players to do the same, which might improve the level of rugby in Australia over time?
I think it's a key question. I think it's a really key question for all Southern Hemisphere nations, really. I mean, in Australia next year, we enter the first year of professional life, come 22 years after it started, whereby we will have more professional players overseas than we will at home. And I think it's probably not the case in New Zealand, but in South Africa, that's certainly the case. In Argentina as well, that's certainly the case. So there is an issue of talent flying overseas, and life playing over there is pretty good if you find the right club. Not saying that everyone finds the right club, but there's an element of less pressure and longer seasons and less travel. And for those people with a family and getting a bit older, you can see the incentive for it, or see the reward for it. So we do need to create an incentive, I think, to get people back, or whether or not you structure it to allow people to go have their experience a bit younger, where it's an experience of going overseas, not necessarily for the money, which will always be an incentive, but for the experience and for gaining experience, which will ultimately benefit you as a player when you come back and when you want to have a great shot playing Test footy. So it's hard, isn't it, though? It's hard to convince people that if you're on the fringe of a Wallaby squad, that maybe 2 years overseas would be good for you. I mean, hindsight's pretty helpful in that, but convincing people that an opportunity will still exist in a couple of years' time, it's not an easy thing to do. So it's I don't have the answer for it, but I think we'd all benefit, I think, a little bit if our players went overseas and came back. The other option, I suppose, is to change the laws and allow more Australians to be picked from overseas teams.
Yeah, it is a hot topic of conversation that might not die down anytime soon. Well, Dean, only focusing on the negative issues does not promote growth. Working in the Rugby Union Players Association, what have you seen as some of the positive aspects to come out of 2017, and how do you build on that going forward?
The positive from rugby that you need to take is the power of community. You look at the Western Force and the Melbourne Rebels were both under the pump as such, under the Axe, and they united, particularly those people in Perth. You know, it was a wonderful show of how passionate non-traditional rugby fans can be for a team, and that was great. And I think there was a moment after the Western Force played the Rebels in the second last round, and those two teams put aside rugby and focused on the community that it was, and a community that was under threat. So if you can harness those things, as you were saying, with a negative frame of mind, there's equal opportunity to do that in a positive sense. And I also think, as I was saying earlier, I think that from poor results, you learn a lot more than from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And I think the conversations going on from a high-performance point of view, and hopefully will be ratified by a good collective bargaining agreement in Australia, will put Australia in good shape for the next coming years, with a little bit of uncertainty come 2020 once the Southern Hemisphere competitions restructure under the new deal. So there's 3 years for a great opportunity, including a World Cup there, where I think we can do some really good things, both on the Super Rugby field and the Test arena.
Absolutely. Well, as I touched on earlier, you will be one of the 4 guest speakers at the Sydney Rugby Business Network event. Without giving too much away, what will you be discussing when you address the fortunate guests that will be in attendance?
I think the positivity of it, really. I think, it's a very competitive landscape here in Australia from sporting-wise. And, and AFL and Rugby League have just had their grand final weekends, seemingly, as you look at top of the iceberg, they're doing well and they're cruising on pretty well. And rugby is slipping back in people's perceptions and personas. So I am fortunate to have a view where you can see a lot of the things going on, which other people might not. But I feel very, very positive about what Australian rugby can do on all arenas across all the different competitions that we have here. It's not going to happen straight away, but the right things are happening in coming time. I'm sure we'll reap the benefits. I mean, if you're in a poor performing team, if you're in a poor performing rugby team or business team, if you do the right things enough, your performance will turn around. And I'm certain at this stage that we're doing the right things enough. We're training well. We're just going to get the results in time.
Most definitely. Well, including you, Dean, it is a magnificent lineup of guest speakers with General Manager of Community Rugby and Strategy at the Australian Rugby Union, Andrew Larratt, in attendance, along with Rugby World Cup winning Wallaby coach and Radwick RFC President Rob Dwyer, and Wallabies defence coach coming up for 2018, Simon Cron. What do you think these 3 will add to the discussion on the evening?
Well, I think they provide a nice balance of the non-professional sides. I think obviously Simon, coming as a Waratahs, he's been very successful here in Sydney with the North Rugby Club, and he can give his perception coming from New Zealand and being brought up in New Zealand coaching structures into Australia. I'm sure he's got his aspect about how we can greatly improve those. And he's also been the Australian under-20s coach as well, so he's inherently attached to the Australian rugby pathways. Bob Dwyer will obviously bring his knowledge and success while he was a coach, but also being president of one of the club rugby teams as well. He brings that sort of combination of years past plus the current nature of club rugby. And then Andrew will hopefully touch on the strategy that Australian rugby has with increased amount of funding as a result of the force. I mean, it was kind of alluded that would be going to the grassroots of rugby here in Australia. So it'll be great to hear what he has to say about how you are planning to put that into action, the increased funding into action.
And we're looking forward to hearing what all four of you have to say as a collective. Finally, Dean, we can all look at 2018 as a year for growth and improvement for Australian rugby, while also dealing effectively with all the challenges that might arise. In many ways, that relates to you on a personal level, as you'll be going on a 16-day hike to the North Pole to raise funds for UK premature birth research charity Born. Please tell our listeners how this opportunity came about and what you hope to gain from the experience.
Yeah, I hope to come back with all my fingers and toes, to be honest. It's going to be pretty chilly, but no, it came about because my wife and I, we lost two children to premature birth. Related issues. There's never one cause when it comes to prematurity. There's a great risk factor of things that can happen. So we lost two children, and as a result, we got in contact with an obstetrician over there who ended up enabling us to have our son, who just turned 2 the other day. But they rang me up, the charity that he's involved with, Born, and asked me whether I'd be interested in coming. And given it we're a fair way away from the North Pole here down in Sydney, that it wasn't an answer straight away. I've never cross-country skied, and I'm going to have to do it for quite a few days. So that'll be one thing that I'll have to try and pick up. But it basically presents an opportunity for me and my wife and family as such to raise awareness for prematurity, because so many people out there lose a child through miscarriage or stillbirth or any other matter of factors that happen in the course of the gestation. But it's never talked about. It's something you deal with often in your own silent world, and yet so many people have been through it, and it's a trend that continues to go up rather than the other way around. So I wanted to raise awareness, but also funds. So we're looking to raise about 150,000 Aussie dollars to go towards the research into making sure that other people don't necessarily have to go through the experience that we've been through.
That's magnificent. Well, Dean, 2017 has been somewhat of a turbulent year for rugby in Australia, and for you, a year that has come with its own challenges and changes. The Rugby Business Network looks forward to you speaking at the Sydney event on Tuesday, the 14th of November, and we wish you all the success in 2018 with your business career and expedition to the North Pole.
Thanks.